Hey guys, welcome to Horology Biology. On today's episode, I have got a special chronograph watch from the late 1960s into the early 1970s. This, of course, is the Roamer Stingray Chronograph with the Valjoux 726 inside. And this watch gave me grief. I kept breaking things, man. It was not normal. It was not super fresh. And unfortunately, it is exactly how it went down. You're going to see exactly how it went down. I don't know if I was having an off day or something, or the sun wasn't shining properly, or my aura wasn't in tune with all the nice juiciness that it should be, but things just kept going wrong, as it happens sometimes. So basically I decided to show you all the things that I kept breaking, twanging, flying. It all happened. So without further ado, I'm going to strip this watch down. I'm going to break all the parts down into their individual core elements. I'm going to pre-clean everything, deep clean everything. I'm going to rebuild it and get it basically up to scratch so that somebody else can enjoy it for many years to come. Now, as you can see, the case on this is very different from most watches. It doesn't actually have a case back. The entire movement is sunken into a sealed case, which makes it pretty damn waterproof. I've removed the crystal from the front of it and the front part of the case, and now I'm going to tackle the hands. And of course, that's going to bring me to my first major problem, which was not fresh at all. And I was super pissed when it happened. I'm not going to lie. Put in plastic over the front of it, and I'm going to release the sweeper. And there's the first issue. I broke it. That's not cool. And unfortunately, it can happen sometimes. It's not the first time it's happened to me at all. And it's an absolute pain. It just basically means that the hands have not been removed for a really long time. Maybe there was a little bit of moisture that I got in there, so there's a little bit of rust. So as I tried to lift it off of the pinion, it basically just ripped the entire internal pipe segment of the sweeper hand completely off from the watch, which sucks because I've got to obviously fix that later on. Now, the crown has actually got two pieces to the winding stem. As you can see, you basically just pull it off. And I'm always hesitant about doing this kind of thing because it's worrying that you're going to break it. Now, in principle, you're not, because it will come away. It has a male and a female part. And to be honest, you've got absolutely no other way of doing it. Otherwise, you're not going to get this movement out of the watch. So you do have to give it a good pull. So once I've got the movement out of the watch, I can then finally see the movement itself, because it's been the first time I've been able to see it, seeing as we're not dealing with a simple screw back. I'm going to remove the dial, of course, as well, because the dial is actually in really nice condition. And I want to put it away and keep it safe, which I highly recommend you do exactly the same whenever you're working on a watch. Don't just leave that lying around. No, sir. You don't know what can happen. You might spill your coffee on it or anything. God forbid that dial gets wrecked. It will ruin your day, even more than ruining a sweeper hand, as you saw 5 minutes ago. So once the dial removed, I put it in the dial case and I can put it to one side. I'm going to now remove the dial washer, and I'm also going to remove the hour wheel. And then I can remove the cannon pinion with a pair of cannon pinion removers, which is pretty similar to a Presto tool. Well, in theory, it is a Presto tool actually, but it's especially for cannon pinions. As always as well, guys, I can't stress it enough, remove your complete balance as soon as possible as well. Hairsprings are ultra delicate and you don't want to mess around with these things. So at the earliest opportunity, remove it from your movement and put it to one side until you're going to need it later on. And seeing as I was having an off day, my big pet hate happened again. Yes, sir, you can clearly see it. I forgot to wind the watch down. Now, it didn't have a lot of charge in it, thankfully, but oh man, things like this really irritate me, seriously. And when I do it myself, it's irritating even more. But let's be honest. This is how it is sometimes, and sometimes it can happen. We all forget things, and as you clearly just saw, so did I. Yep, believe it or not, yours truly did forget. And it's going from bad to worse. And there goes a spring. Now this super vexed me, because that spring went absolutely flying, and then I spent the next 15 minutes trying to find it, even though it's quite a sizable spring. So my day's not going fresh. No, sir. I hope yours going a lot better than mine is, because so far things have not been going good for me at all. But I actually thought to myself, you know what? The more problems that arise in regards to this watch, the more it's going to make a pretty good video, because obviously I've got to fix these. Otherwise, I'm not going to have a completed watch. And then what's the point? So the other thing that I always stress about as well is when you're working on a chronograph, remove all the springs first. Don't drop them and spend the next 15 minutes on your hands and knees trying to find them, of course. But it is important that you do remove all of your springs from the chronograph mechanism first. It's going to remove all of the tension from these parts, and these are some very delicate parts that you're dealing with. So it is important that all of the tension is removed, and the best way to do it is by deactivating all of these springs from the beginning. So I'm just removing the coupling as well now, as you can see, and that lives next to the driving wheel. Off goes the column wheel, very important wheel. And that gives you that really nice, smooth chronograph start-stop feature. And then there we go again, another spring. Man, it's not normal, seriously. Absolute headache in regards to it. I don't know if it's just like I've got some shakiness going on or my tweezers are just glitching out, but that was the second spring that completely evaded me. It's not normal. So removing the chronograph wheel for the minute part. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the driving wheel. Now what I do is, because there's no room here and I need to use a special Presto tool, I will use a old ratchet wheel to keep some space. And there goes the other problem. I've just knackered up the driving wheel. My day is going not normal. Now the rest of it I'm removing with a Canon pinion remover tool, which in principle worked, as you could see, really well. And of course the last thing I wanted to do was bend or damage that extended pivot underneath, because that would be a real pain and more than likely it would break, and I would of course have to replace that wheel. So again, that's another thing that I need to add to the list now. I've got to fix that driving wheel as well. So I've just loosened off all of the screws for the big train of wheels bridge. It actually covers the mainspring as well, the mainspring barrel, sorry, and it is a beefy bridge, as you can see. And underneath you will see the crown wheel core, and of course you've got the train of wheels as well, which I'm going to dismantle right about now. So inspect them as you go, as I'm clearly doing, and there's a lot of gunk on this watch, so as you can see it's clearly not been serviced for a long time. It's very dirty, definitely needs a good clean. And the best way to go about it is just take your time removing the parts. Off goes the ratchet wheel. Then we've got the mainspring barrel as well, complete with the mainspring inside. And then what I've done is I've flipped over the bridge so that I can remove the crown wheel and the crown wheel core. Also the click and the click spring as well. But all of these parts located underneath the bridge. So now I've flipped the movement over onto the dial side. I'm going to remove this spacer bridge, which it's to support the dial basically, so it keeps it raised above the rest of the chronograph parts. Because all of the 12-hour chronograph parts are on the dial side of the watch, as you can see, which is what I'm breaking down now. Just gently lifting that up, and as you can see, it did have quite a lot of pressure. 12-hour runner coming off as well. Now, I've mentioned this on many of my other videos as well, guys, especially when you're working on a chronograph. Put your screws back where you removed them. I know I'm repeating myself on this for people who've seen some of my other videos, but it really will save you such a headache. And still, I get quite a few emails that come through from people saying like, oh, how do you know where your screws live? And I just keep repeating myself. I don't. How am I supposed to memorize exactly where every single screw goes? I mean, yeah, of course I know where a lot go, but a lot of these screws look identical, but they're not identical. Some of them will have different lengths. So to save yourself that big headache, which will happen, just simply put the screw back where you got it from. Then when you've cleaned everything and you're rebuilding it, your screws are already clean because they're in the movement, and you basically know exactly where they're going to go. So in my opinion, it's really the best way to do it. So all of the 12-hour chronograph parts have been removed, as you can see, and I'm just now working on the keyless works. So off goes the setting lever spring, held in with those two small screws. Minute wheel comes off, and then you've got two smaller intermediate wheels which line all the way up to the winding pinion and the sliding pinion. Beautiful movements to work on these guys. I've worked on these before. Well, the Valjoux 72, to be honest. This is the Valjoux 726. It is in principle pretty much the same, but it just does run on a higher frequency. Just remove the yoke, and now removing the yoke spring. Taking out the setting lever screw, which is not actually a screw, it's a push down style one. I much prefer these, if I'm honest. And then that was part of the winding stem. Remember I said at the beginning it is actually two parts. So just pegging out all of these jewels, simply just use a piece of pegwood and you can clean up the movement. It's important to move as much gunk and grime off of it before you throw it into your cleaning machine. It just helps it. Taking out the mainspring as well, and then I can give the mainspring barrel a good cleaning. I'm also just giving a quick buffing to the pivots as well of the wheels before I throw those into the cleaning machine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tackle reconnecting this driving wheel. And it is pretty straightforward if I'm honest, but I will need to use a staking set. First of all, I centered the stake, as you could see just then, and now I'm lining up to friction fit the part back into the driving wheel. And it goes on pretty snug. I'm happy about that. I didn't break it, which is great. I didn't think I had, to be honest, but obviously I have to reconnect everything. So it's more time consuming than anything else. Now for the chronograph sweeper hand, the hand actually did bend. So there's a little bit of a trick that you can do regarding to bend it into shape. If you hold the hand over a block and you just gently stroke it with some tweezers, you can manipulate the shape of it back into a relatively straight line. Now it is supposed to be tipped at the end, which is fine, and I'm really happy with how straight I got it. Now to fit the pipe back in, yeah, this is a bit of trial and error. Now this came out very smooth and I didn't see anything like torn, so to speak, like broken, so I should be able to just friction fit back this into place. It was pretty difficult lining everything up because it is so small, guys. I mean, this is magnified pretty hard and it really was a bit of effort. And just as a little bit of extra security for this, I am adding a little drop of glue on each side of the pipe just to make sure that it is good. Because you have to remember that when you refiring your chronograph, when you're resetting it, it's going to snap all the way back to 12 and it's going to use a lot of force. And the last thing I want this to do is break. And of course, guys, special shout going out to all the HB members and Patreons. Had a couple of new ones and I'm very happy that you guys are here. So I added your names just on the screen just then. So super appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, thank you from the bottom of my heart. So rebuilding the watch, I always do this way. I basically oil and clean the capstones, and then I basically will deal with the mainspring. I'm not saying that my way is the right way. It's just the habit of how I got into doing it, and it's just the way I work. It's the way I do it. Using 9010 on the inside of the capstone. Once you've added the oil, you can put the two pieces back together and then you're looking for that nice bubble of oil, what you can see there, so that you can put it back into the movement. You also repeat the process on the dial side as well. I'm showing it for the balance side and the principle is exactly the same, so you can't go wrong. You just simply repeat the same procedure of what you're seeing right now. Close the Inca block, set in, and then just wipe off any residue or any dust off of the top of the capstone with a little piece of Rodico. And then the other thing what you're looking for is a really nice fast action when you just lightly blow it so that your balance is moving super free. That is exactly what you want. So it's a hand-wound movement, so no chrono grease or braking grease is needed for this, obviously, because it has a brake, because it's a hand-wound movement. And I'm going to install the mainspring back into the barrel. Now, using a set of mainspring winders, as you can see, you just need to align this so that your bridle just sits in there and clicks onto the little groove. It can be a little bit fiddly, but I would just say take your time on this. There's no rush. Now, of course, once you've got everything lined up, then you can go ahead and wind it into your winder. I also dab off any dust or anything that's got on there with some Rodico, because that's going to go on the inside of the barrel. And once it's pressed in, as you can see. So you want it to be as clean as possible. Reinstalling the arbor, making sure that it all latches up. Adding a little bit of 1300 to the top of the arbor and also to the spring. And then I can close off the lid with this mainspring closing tool. And again, guys, I'm not saying that you need to do this in this particular order. It's completely up to you. I just like to do this at the beginning when I'm rebuilding a watch. I always do the capstones and I always do the mainspring barrel. So adding a little bit of 1300 to where the center wheel will go and also where the arbor is going to go for the mainspring. Again, adding a little dab of 1300 for where the ratchet wheel is going to go. And then I can tackle the underside of the bridge. Little grease on the underside of the crown wheel because it is constantly just rubbing on the bottom of the bridge. And also added a little bit of 1300 for where the core is going to go. And that's held in with 2 screws. So I seem to be a little bit on fire of late with my videos for the year, which I'm really happy to be going into. I've got this one now that you're watching right now. I also had that Temu watch that did pretty well. I'm really happy with the feedback I get on that as well. I'm really happy that people are out there interested in getting into watchmaking as a hobby and they can go out and buy one of those cheap watches to learn on. Because again, I swear by it, the principles of those watches, the core principles are exactly the same as any other mechanical watch. It's just simply how it is. Obviously, the parts and the quality are of a much lesser quality, but at the end of the day, you have got something where you know everything is working to start with, so to speak. And a lot of people, they turn around and they go, oh, I'm going to practice on an old pocket watch, or I'm going to practice on an old vintage watch. That's fine. It's no problem at all. But I guarantee that's probably going to cost you maybe around the same price that you're going to pay for one of those cheap new watches. And you're not 100% sure if A, everything is working correctly when you first get one of those old vintage watches. And also the parts are going to be worn as well. So you're not 100% sure what you're dealing with when you first get it. So I really, really think one of those cheap watches for like $30, $20, whatever, to learn on and to practice on is really the best way forward. So please, by all means, feel free to use my videos to learn from. That's what they're there for. And enjoy it. And of course, you can hit me up with any questions as well. And I'll do my best to reply to each and every one of you as usual. And I have another couple of videos as well that I'm working on as well. I have a couple of review videos that I've got to do. I've got, oh man, I've got one watch that I'm working on at the minute. I'm recording it as well. And it's a brand that I've never had on the channel before. And I'm not that into that brand. So that's kind of told you guys already what it is, because I've gone on about this brand before, that I'm not that into them, but I've got one. And it's the first one that I've had on the channel. So you have to guess what particular watch brand could I be talking about? It's interesting. So of course, once you've aligned all of your train of wheels and you've got everything lined up in your pivots, it's oiling time. So using a combination of 90-10 on all of these pivots, apart from the center wheel, this is using 1300, which is a slightly thicker oil. And what you will do is, once you've done that, you'll flip the movement over and you'll repeat the process on the other side. Also adding a little bit of grease as well onto the post of the center wheel for where the cannon pinion is going to go. It is really important that that has got lubrication. The cannon pinion is friction fit, but it does need to have lubrication underneath. And simply snap that down with your tweezers and make sure that it's engaged, as you can see. Little 1300 onto the post where the minute wheel is going to go, and also where the intermediate wheels will go as well. And then I can just drop those onto the movement. So how's everybody's week gone into January now? It's the 17th of January today, so I'm assuming you're all back at work, all miserable, all not happy after all the festive time of eating too much and drinking too much. Now you're back in the office. All miserable for a new year. Enjoy. No, I'm only joking, guys. I hope it's not that bad, and I do hope that you all had a good break, obviously, and getting back into the rhythm of things, the way of life. So starting to build up the keyless works now, put in the yoke. I'm also adding in the yoke spring. These have both got their independent screws, as you can see. And then I'm also adding a little bit of 1300 just between the yoke spring and the yoke. More 1300 for where the setting lever screw is going to go as that gets lowered on. And then once you've got everything on place, oh yeah, sorry, last but least, I'm just putting in this, yeah, I cannot remember the name of this. It's like a large screw. And to be honest, I think its only real purpose is, one is to just cover up the end of the setting lever screw so it doesn't lift. And at the same time, it also works by being a support for the dial as well, because it's obviously the correct size, matching to the other dial spacer on the other side. So I've greased up the setting lever spring, and then I'm just installing that with the two screws. And then just nipping those up. So time to install the pallet forks, and I'm going to lubricate these as well. Well, when I say lubricated, I mean I will lubricate the exit stone, because you only need to do one. I've added some fixer drop onto there so that the oil disperses nice and evenly. And I've also removed any of the fixer drop from the pivots, because you do not need to oil the pivots jewels for the pallet forks at all. It's basically going to remove as much friction as possible, which is what you want. Added on the cock for the pallet forks, and I've also given a few winds into this. Checking it's engaging as it is, and then I can go ahead and just oil that exit stone. Just need a tiny little drop, and then I will just move it across a few times and repeat the process so that all of the teeth of the escape wheel get a little bit of lubrication. Finally, of course, I can put on the balance. Just offer it to the movement, take your time, make sure that your pivot sinks in correctly, and then just drop down the cock onto the watch before you screw it on. And you will get a watch that should fire up, as you can see, like this one. And the more that you work on watches, the more you get used to amplitude and things like that. And the way that that balance is moving, I'm thinking that we've got a pretty decent amplitude, because there was a really nice swing going backwards and forwards on that balance wheel. So flip the movement back over, and now I can keep on building up the rest of the movement. And what I'm doing is I'm tackling all of the 12-hour chronograph mechanism. Now on this particular movement, like some other chronographs, all of the 12-hour chronograph parts are on the dial side, so underneath the dial. There's literally no room on the other side. Little bit of 90-10 where the chronograph 12-hour runner is going to go. Engaging the spring and screwing that down. making sure that no springs are going to fly away from me. I must admit that things did go a little bit smoother. My problems were all in the breakdown of this watch. And it's disheartening, man. Oh, it's bad enough when one thing goes wrong, but when I have about 4 or 5 things, like, all go wrong, it's not normal. It's not fresh. So remember, I've said this before as well, when you're installing parts onto a watch, nothing should feel forced in any shape or form. Well, actually, the only thing that should feel a little bit forced is when you're engaging springs, because you actually have to apply a little bit of tension in order to engage a spring. So that's normal. But what I mean is when you're fitting like normal parts, which parts that are basically screwed in, everything should be fluid. There should be no resistance. There should be nothing that feels that ain't right kind of thing. Because if it does feel like that, I guarantee you it will not be right. No, sir, it will not. And you will need to basically be looking into what exactly the problem is. It could be that you were using the wrong screw, for example, something like that. Maybe something was not as engaged as well as what you thought it was. But it really is clockwork, excuse the pun. Things need to just be super smooth, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be. So everything's been dealt with on the dial side of the watch, as you can see, and we've flipped it over now. And now I'm building up all of the chronograph parts for the rest of this Valjoux 726. We have a complete watch running because it's been running for a while now, as you can see. The balance is all in, the watch is ticking away happy as far as I can see. And now we just need to build up the remainder of the chronograph parts. I'm also just adding a little bit of tension there as well while I engage that spring, and also adding just a little bit of grease onto this as well. It's really important to lubricate in the correct places. There are sheets that you can get for most vintage watches if you guys don't know. I should leave a link in regards to that, but I know Cousins UK website, for example, if you search in their search page, you can actually find a lot of tech documents for old vintage watches, like the Valjoux 72, for example, many other watches as well. And you can find the original tech docs, and a lot of them will actually provide you with an oiling chart, is what they call it, where it shows you exactly where you should be lubricating the watch. Now, of course, you're not going to find every single movement out there. It's just how it is. These movements are decades old. But for quite a few of them, they are out there that you can find. And I definitely advise doing it. And you can save them as a PDF, create your own folders, as I do. And then if you ever work on one again in the future, you can look back and go, oh yeah, I've got that, so I'll use that. It's a good reference point. And another thing, obviously, when it comes to working on watches, it never stops being a learning curve. That's another thing. Some people think, oh, I know everything. No, man, you will never know everything. I certainly don't. No way. You learn things all the time, and that's the beauty of it. So just adding on this reset hammer, I've also greased it up before I popped it on because it's greased up in a few different parts using a combination of a thicker grease and also using 9010 on the end of the blades, which are going to hit against the hearts of the minute runner and the seconds runner. Just lining up these tension springs, and then I can screw that down, making sure that it's in place. So reinstall this pesky driving wheel, which decided to break on me into 2 pieces, and that's just friction fit. On goes the coupling as well. And I can align that properly before I screw it down. So this is quite a large spring as well. What I usually do with this is I screw it on a little bit, And then I will just pop it into place so that it snaps and aligns. As you can see, just use a screwdriver to push it back and then it snaps down. Also adding in this final small spring, which is for the coupling, so that it can spring backwards and forwards. Just make sure that's engaged as it is. Last but least, add in the switch and the big screw that lives on top of that. That connects obviously to the 12-hour reset as well. And then just cleaning off any excess oil and grease that I've put on. It's also important as well that you align your teeth of your driving wheel so that they're level with the coupling, nice and flush. And obviously as I just put it on, it was a little bit higher, so I needed to make that adjustment. Also checking now that the chronograph is engaging correctly and resetting, which it is, so I'm really happy about that. So a little 1300 for where the hour wheel is going to go, because I'm going to be dialing up real soon, guys, real soon. Adding on the dial washer as well. And then I can add the dial back to the watch. So line up the dial feet to the appropriate holes and you can simply just push that down. Now to screw it and secure it, the dial feet screws are not on the side of the movement on this particular movement. They're on the underside and you just simply screw those into place and nip it up. So refitting the hands, there's no date, so I can simply put the hands on where I want and then just align the minute hand to 12 with the hour hand. Also adding on that sweeper, which is nice and secure, I'm really happy to see. Giving it a quick test, and it fires back to 12, so I'm really happy about that. No slippage, all working perfectly. Very, very happy with the fix, because it would have been a pain in the ass trying to find a new one. So checking it out on the Timergrapher, it hasn't been properly regulated, and I'm doing this now because I will have to dismantle it anyway because it's a sealed case. But we got amplitude up in the late 270s and the rate is a little bit low, under minus 10 seconds. And you could see with the rate of the trace line, I'm really happy with the results of what it's looking like. It will simply just need a little bit nudge of regulation and the watch will be really, really good. So offered the movement to the case and I'm just adding in this ring which the crystal will sit around. Also popping in the crown with the half piece of the winding stem on. You simply just push it in and it'll click into place. And I do want to give this crystal a buffing, and it's an original crystal as well. Like a lot of original Omega crystals, they have the logo in the middle. I'm not sure if you guys can make it out, but there is an R in the middle of the crystal as well for a Roamer, which is really, really nice to see. So I'm just giving it a little bit of polywash treatment, a little bit on the inside as well, and then of course I'm going to do it on the outside. Doesn't need full sanding treatment because the crystal wasn't actually that bad, but it definitely needed a buffing, let's say. And it came out really, really good. So there's a casing of it. As you can see, it's a weird setup. The movement's already set into the case with the crown and the pushers. You pop the crystal on top and it fits down quite snug, and you can do that with hand. And then the whole case lowers on top. Now this is heavily friction fitted and you do need to use a crystal press to press the entire movement into itself, into the rest of the case. And it took a little bit, but it's important because obviously you want it to be ultra waterproof, so to speak. So there we have it, guys, the Roamer Stingray Chrono from the late 60s with the infamous Valjoux 726 inside. If you enjoyed this video, hit a like on it. And guys, 2 more videos on the screen right now if you've not seen them. Grab your coffee and enjoy. And as always, guys, till next time.